Hey, welcome back to Atypical Talk. This is a podcast where we have conversations that illuminate the intersection of faith, culture, and the common spaces of our humanity. I'm Abby.
And I'm Joel. And today we are jumping into part 2 of our conversation with Creation Desautels. She is a therapist here in Kokomo, Indiana, and also an adjunct professor. And we just have so much fun talking about all the messy mental matters.
Yep.
And so we're just going to jump in today, continuing to talk about this intersection of Christian spirituality and mental health and psychology. And so let's just go.
Yeah. Our first topic today is an NBC News article titled Olympic Figure Skater Gracie Gold talks about pressure she felt to minimize mental health struggles. It wasn't palatable. After Gracie Gold won her first U.S. figure skating championship in 2014, she began to feel the pressure of elite figure skating. Her mental health started to deteriorate as the self-destructive voice in her head grew. Gold took a break from competing in 2017 to seek treatment for what were announced as an eating disorder and anxiety. In reality, she was dealing with suicidal thoughts. It wasn't palatable is the word that they use for the world and specifically the skating community, Gold said. We don't talk about those things out loud, but for me, it wasn't gossip or hearsay. It was my story. I was in the middle of Arizona in rehab in the middle of a season, and I felt like an honest answer was appropriate. In the memoir, Gold opens up for the first time about being raped by a fellow skater at 21 years old. She reported the incident to U.S. Figure Skating and the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, but a resolution has not been reached. Gold said the challenge of writing her memoir was still making people enjoy the sport despite her love-hate relationship with it. So what would you say if Gracie came and sat and talked with you for a few hours?
Okay, I want to tread lightly on the idea of what I would say, because so much of how you respond is in line with the eccentricities of what they present and what they ask, right? Mm-hmm. But looking at her story, there are a lot of individual points that I think merit examination. There's the idea of if you are prepared and you want your story to be told, your story is yours, right? Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that every venue is equally appropriate for your story. Mm-hmm. It does mean that if part of your healing comes through the sharing, go forth and seek the venues that make space and can hold your story. Yeah. So that would be a piece of the puzzle.
I'm just to jump in a little bit, because we've talked about this in lots of different ways throughout the last year on the podcast, just with this messy tension of platforming and monetizing someone's specific trauma. And I think this is an interesting case as well when she's writing a memoir and she's getting the story out there. But you mentioned part of the healing can come from sharing the story. And I think sometimes we have come, and not being a mental health professional, we've come at more of almost a little bit of a cynicism towards the sharing of the story in that kind of a way, just because it feels like using exploitative action, or people are telling her to do this because they're going to make money off the story as well. So how do you balance that and speak wisdom into that?
Well, so note my language was when you're ready.
When you're ready. There it is.
When you feel like you're ready. But, the sharing of our story involves two things, right? It involves me feeling like I am in a place where I'm ready to give my story as a gift or as an object lesson or as an opportunity or an invitation to perspective. The other is finding the recipient. And this is where I encourage a really nuanced approach, because it's really inflammatory to talk about the skating world said it wasn't palatable, and it's really easy to vilify that. But if I'm a mom, and I am a mom, I got 3 kids, and I go take my kids to see figure skating because it's beautiful, it's graceful, it's artful, and I take my kids to see that, and the announcer says, and of course we know she is recently rebounded from a sexual assault. Let me be clear, like I was going there as a form of art appreciation. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I want to have to answer those questions in my minivan on the way home.
What's that mean? Yeah, what happened?
And so it's interesting when we talk about it. What I like to encourage people is, you have every right to tell your story on your terms. Other people also have the right to not be ready to receive your story on the terms you are prepared to give them. But that if you continue to search, chances are good you're going to find a place that is ready to receive that story, that you feel comfortable giving it. But there has to be a mutuality there, right? So if I was dealing with a client that was grappling with this, there are all kinds of different tributaries to explore. There's, your story is your own and you have every right to share it. Maybe it's painful and hard that some of the communities that have been open to you are closed to you when it comes to sharing your story. How can you learn from that? How can you grieve from that? How can you process that? How can you use that to spur you on to find places to share your story? So I don't think it's a clear good guy, bad guy. I think it's actually just much more complicated than that. But what I would say is, if it feels like your story is being exploited, that's even if you're benefiting monetarily, that's probably not a great venue for your story. And then I'm just going to say this. I think there's a seduction to the story going viral and there being a big kind of cult of personality following and there being like a groundswell of support and whatever. So what I think often happens is somebody gets seduced by the trappings that come with it. And it's only in the aftermath that it feels exploitative. At the time, it felt empowering. And the reality is, sometimes we need to acknowledge that we were complicit in the exploitation of our own stories. Mm-hmm. And that has its, right? Like, these are all super complicated.
Well, yeah, and especially in the age of social media, like, that is just it's so much easier to do and more accessible to do than ever before.
So I would talk about venues where your story can be resonant, effective, and clarifying what are your goals. Is your goal to take down a big thing that's corrupt? Is it to create more awareness? Is it to create collaborative coalition? Like, what do you even want out of the telling of the story? Or maybe all you want is catharsis, in which case, broadcast into the ether, my friend. Just be clear. What are you trying to accomplish? And are you doing what you're doing in a way that is likely to be successful at accomplishing those outcomes? Because I think a lot of times people just jump in, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I think that that's a deeply gray thing for there to have been a sexual assault. And I don't know the ins and outs, but I would want to know, why wasn't that just taken to local police authorities? Why was it handled by, like, I thought rape was just like a magistrate issue. Like, mm-hmm. Don't cops handle that? The fact that, but I don't know, maybe it happened internet. Like, there's so many variables we don't know. Mm-hmm. But what I would say with her is, it would be like, I grieve with you and for you in the discomfort of what happened. I want to help you find your voice in healthy and constructive ways. I also want you to be a realist about what it means when you make that voice broad, mm-hmm. and how you will necessarily lose some intimacy and control over that. And I think as long as you're okay with that, it's going to be a process. And I think the thing is to be self-aware and to check in, and also have good people around you to encourage you to be self-aware and self-critiquing and just wise about the context that you're interplaying with. I know that's a mushy sounding answer, but I actually think that there's not this clear, like,
yeah,
the sports people are just demonic and bad, and I just don't think it's black and white like that. I think it's really, really nuanced.
So a couple other things inside the story I would love to get your take on is, just the idea around a high-performing individual at the highest level of a sport, someone who's very driven, who's been in competition probably as early as she possibly could, mm-hmm. to rise to the heights that she did, and then to be struggling with self-doubt, self-destructive voice. I mean, the trauma that she experienced in the sexual assault, but Do you find that high-performing individuals, highly driven individuals struggle with speaking about mental health issues because of pride and that, just deal with it kind of thing? And how do you speak to this reality of our identity getting tied to performance in things that can also lead to some really murky mental matters?
Okay, so what's interesting is this idea that high-performing people are uniquely prone to this. I happen to have had the privilege of, I've worked with people who are extremely successful financially in the business world, people who have status. And I did my internships at Community Howard. I worked with people who have addictions upon addictions and trauma upon trauma. And it's interesting, we always highlight it's super hard for people that are high performers to talk about. You know what? It's just as hard for the guy with 3 teeth who's got track marks up his arm. That guy's got that same fig leaf instinct that other guy does. It's the same. That pride, in my experience, is the same. And we act like the high performers got a lot to lose. You want to know who's got a lot to lose? The guy that's living in a hotel at 7-Eleven whose girlfriend's about to leave him. That guy's got so much less aggregate social, relational, financial, economic capital. And so it's funny, we always talk about the people at the top of their game and how far they have to fall. Mm-hmm. But they've got money, they've got resource, they've got support, they got access. You know what? Everybody walks into my room feeling like they've got a lot to lose. Jump in, the water's warm. It's part of being a human person to want to just fig leaf over those areas where you feel inadequate, desperate, poorly resourced, spread thin. And what's interesting is we talk about people and having a lot to lose, but very rarely do we look at the fact that mental health professionals, they get imposter syndrome too, right? It's hard to go into the room and talk about communicating clearly when, my 13-year-old daughter was like, oh, Mom, right? Everybody has imposter syndrome and everybody has a lot to lose and everybody feels the pull of their finitude and inadequacy. So I guess what I want to do is I want to level that playing field. I don't care if you're an NBA player or somebody living under a bridge. When you come into my office, there's this part of you that wants to be like, no, it's not that bad. I'm not that, I can fix it. Everybody wants to believe that. Everybody also deep down, in my opinion, and again, this is just rooted in my existential prior allegiances, everybody knows I can't fix it. I cannot fix that which is broken within me, and I can't fix the brokenness in this world. I can't. This is the insight of Christianity. We need more than our own adequacy to fix and mend. But there is, it's everybody's in the Garden of Eden stitching together those fig leaves trying to be we can cover it, it's fine, move along, it's fine, right? Doesn't everybody have that? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I guess that's what I want to say. And so what I would say is we all equally feel that way, and you come into the room and you will make progress when the pain you feel is bigger than the pride you feel at that fig leaf impulse. That's when momentum happens.
So what would you say to somebody who, if in her case, her mental crises are tied to achievement, the identity of performing at a high level, I am this thing that I can do well.
Yeah.
How do you begin to break down those lines between identity and performance?
Well, I think in my case, often I'm going to be taking an existential route to that, right? No matter what you do or how good you are at anything, if your identity and self-worth is tied into performative values, you will always be wanting. Right?
Yeah, it's a moving target.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Because no matter how good I get at this, I'm not good at I will always be wanting. And so I guess I would start with this fundamental insight that you're a human being, not a human doing. Like, I know that's trite and dumb, but like, it really is true. This idea that like your value is in the fact that you are a sentient person, image bearing the divine. If we can root your value in this existential truth, then whether you're the best or the worst, right? There's merit in your story and there's merit in your presence. And this is going to sound terrible, but I think one of the things that we would be talking about is like, this is rooted in some kind of pride, right? Let's just be real. There's a pride element to this. Like, other people can have worth for being whatever, but like, but I need to, right? So there's a self. And so I think those are facets we would need to talk about. Like, first of all, where do you root your capital T truth and your ultimate purpose and meaning? Where do you root that? And if it is performative, then like, these are the things that are going to naturally flow out of that. And then the ego associated with, and the pride associated with, like, in order, like the black and white thinking of, in order for me to have any value at all, I must be at this level and accomplish these things. I think those are all entry points for a deeper dialogue. And then where it goes is going to be so dependent on how that other person shows up and where they are and what their history is. Like, there's no like, oh, and then we're just going to do these 18 points, right? Like, it's not like that. But these would be entry points. It would be like, let's talk about how much you stroke your own ego about your efficacy when you focus in these areas of super speciality, right? And then all of the ways that you have to really define perfection in this narrow scope, because I'd be willing to bet that while she's a great skater, she's not a Michelin star chef, and she doesn't know how to build bridges. And so the reality is, it's like, you really have to narrow your universe to this one thing. And even then, you will find that your body fails, your muscles fail, your will fails, your fatigue happens. And so
then you meet somebody who you've never even heard of before, who's actually better than you are, and your entire world crumbles and your self-worth crumbles. I mean, I think so often, like, just in my work as a pastor, like, so many people want to come and they want to hear, like, well, what do I need to do so that I get in God's good graces? And what do I need to do so that, this, what's the, again, like we talked in the last episode, what's the math equation? Yeah. How many times do I need to come to church? How much money do I need to give? Where do I need to do this? And do I, all those different kind of things. And again, it just comes back to this performative nature of proving ourselves and finding our worth in what we can accomplish, which is a folly, which is just like, it's a moving target, like you mentioned, and it actually roots back to our universe being very small and self-centered. And I think that's some of the danger of that reality of finding our identity in what we can do, which is just never gonna satisfy. And I think that could lead, and does lead, to our mental health, and that imposter syndrome being louder, and that self-destructive voice being louder and louder and louder, because deep down we know that it's a folly and that it's not
we know we can never do all of the things all enough all the time. We know it. And so I mean, it's hard, and I certainly wouldn't start out the gate with somebody being like, so let's talk about this being rooted in your selfishness and pride. How to win clients and influence people. No, but I think over time you create that alliance, and they see there for you. This is a dialogue we can tread into lightly and lovingly. And I think, just like you as a pastor, I think as a clinician, I'm balancing grace and truth, right? Like, there are hard things you need to hear, but like, I'm not in the gotcha business, like, right? It's not about like
hot take.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. Like, I'm not interested in that mic drop moment with my clients. I'm interested in this, like, that slow dawning self-reckoning where it's like, oh, it is fundamentally selfish of me and self-focused of me to be anxious all the time, because what am I anxious about? How people are perceiving me, how people like me, how people, like, I mean, it's hard. Like,
that's when you get to drop the mic, when they say that out loud.
Yeah, like when they say that out loud, I'm like, okay, so do you want to talk about scaling back our services? Right? Like, this is when it's like, hey, like, you're moving on your own steam. But yeah, that's what I want. I want them to come to that place where they're like, wow, energetically that's super expensive, and the reality is I'm super inward all the time. Yeah. And like, that can't be good, right? Like, that can't be what I'm designed for. That seems kind of it seems kind of like not the person I want to be, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know how well I answered that question. I think that of the four that I was given before I came in, that is by far the most complex because it involves an individual person and their individual story. And
an
it's
embodied experience that we can't have.
Yeah, and
with
an
her.
embodied. Yeah, and so like all of the critiques from first one cross-apply to this third topic, and I'm like, there's a lot of meat on those bones, but ultimately there's a lot of self-discovery to be had in that. But that, you know, I do think we should make space to hear stories, but I also think these days people are just kind of almost weaponizing and shoving stories in people's faces, and that's not always effective either. So I just feel like that's a really complex dialogue any way you slice it. So if you want better answers, maybe get a social media specialist for that question. I don't know.
Yeah. Our next topic is a CNN article titled "All We Want Is Revenge: How Social Media Fuels Gun Violence Among Teens." As a street outreach worker in Oakland, California, Juan Campos has seen the pull and power of gangs, and he offers teens support when they've emerged from the juvenile justice system, advocates for them in school, and, if needed, helps them find housing, mental health services, and treatment for substance abuse. But he said he's never confronted a force as formidable as social media, where small boasts and disputes online can escalate into deadly violence in schoolyards and on street corners. Shamari Martin Jr. was an outgoing 14-year-old and respectful to his teachers in Oakland. Mixed in with videos of smiling friends on his Instagram feed were images of Shamari casually waving a gun or with cash fanned across his face. In March 2022, he was shot when the car he was in took a hail of bullets. His body was left on the street, and emergency medical workers pronounced him dead at the scene. Friends of Shamari took to social media to show their grief, but some posts demanded revenge for his death. Such online outpourings of grief can often presage additional violence. Social media companies say they remove content that violates their policies against threatening others or encouraging violence as quickly as possible. But by the time a video is removed, hundreds of people may have seen it. So what is it about revenge that feels so good, and how can we turn off that desire for revenge?
So I think revenge feels good because when we are in a state where we're doing that, man, this is going to get deep quick. We are putting ourselves in the place of God. Yeah. Like, no, we fundamentally, at an existential level, we are saying that
judge, jury, executioner.
I get to be all the things. So, and when we feel like we have been made small or diminished somehow, the call for revenge is the ultimate power grab, right? Mm-hmm. You defamed me, you made me small, you hurt somebody that's a member of my tribe. When I rush straight to a call for vengeance, right, I automatically, in my head, if not functionally speaking, flip that power differential. And I think there's something seductive about that because when we look at anger, right, so anger is a secondary, not a primary emotion. You look at infants right at birth, infants don't typically express anger right away. Mm-hmm. They have wants and they can express negative sentiment, but typically anger is a responsive emotion to not seeing the clear path forward to solvency for one of these other negative emotions. I feel misunderstood. I don't see a path forward to resolution. Therefore, I get angry about the unresolved negative emotion. Mm-hmm. And revenge is the ultimate expression of that. I now need to invert so that that unresolved thing does not remain perpetually unresolved. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think it feels very empowered and very empowering. Right, this idea that like there will be a swift, decisive resolution, but also all those nuances that I've talked about in other things. A call for revenge doesn't necessitate any of the nuance. It's like why we like Marvel movies. There's a good guy, there's a bad guy, there's a right, there's a wrong, there's swift, decisive, right? There's something about that just feels great, mm-hmm. right? So I think that there is something seductive about revenge. But it's interesting. And I'm not saying gun violence is a problem. I think it is. I'm not saying it's not. Clearly it is. But, like, we see this all the way down to, like, petty grievance vetting by influencers. There's this guy, and I'll admit, I think he's incredibly clever. I don't know his name, but, like, he really takes up the banner of, like, mothers and women. And so he does this shtick where he will be like, I was in a coffee shop, or I was in a Target, or I was doing this. And he'll outline an injustice done to this woman. A comment was made about her weight. A comment was made about her parenting. And he'll be like, and I saw her and was like, ew, gross. And then what he'll do is proceed to, like, offload this litany of verbal bashing of the man that did this. Now, I've seen this, and I've got to admit there's a part of me that's like, that's really funny. Like, I enjoy the fact that he's, like, taking up the cause of this woman whose hair, like, I mean, but I have to admit that ultimately it's a non-productive, right? And that in essence, he's doing the same thing that he's gotching that guy for doing. Yeah. He's just saying that he's morally better because that guy started it, right? But, like, isn't this, like, every backseat argument between your kids? Are people for hitting? No. Are you hitting your sister? Yeah, but she started it. Yeah. Okay, but are people for hitting? No, people aren't for hitting. So the fact that she hit you, does that make her for hitting? No. Right? People aren't for hitting the standard. Yeah. And so I think one of the things we see in social media is we lose the standard bearing because nobody's there gatekeeping the standard. And let's admit that it's fun and funny and in the immediate term, wildly satisfying, right?
It's a quick little jolt. It's a buzz.
Yeah, it's a dopamine hit. Yeah, it's like, oh, you got yours, you know. So I get the appeal of it. But we act like gun violence is the thing, right? Like, we need to... But actually, let's strip it back.
There's things underneath the thing.
Yeah, but, like, if you want to see the seeds that fuel that, let's just talk about ad hominem and character assassinations blindly issued.
Takedowns, just verbal takedowns.
Yeah, just the petty grievances and the blaming and the, like, black and white. You know, this, when it grows up and goes through puberty and gets full grown and joins a community, becomes this. So it's like, if you're worried about gang violence or if you're worried about people ratcheting up and behaving badly, why don't you start with, like, not letting your kids get on social media without you literally sitting next to the computer with them and talking through the merits of why they would post what they would post. Because the reality is, you don't go from zero to gun violence. You go from so-and-so made a lighthearted joke that made me feel a little small. And now I don't know how to process my sense of indignation. Let's talk about that, because this is where that goes. Yeah. But really, it's not super seductive to be like, what you really need to do is teach your kids better conflict resolution skills, parents. Also, get your kids off social media. This is ironic. We're doing a podcast. I get it. There is something...
There's no kids listening. No children.
Get off children. But like, legitimately, when we look at meta-analytical data, suicidality, eating disorders, like sexual norms and standards, all things get worse with more time on social media. So one of the things that I think is really interesting is we're talking about, like, these wild outcomes, but nobody is like, hey, what if you didn't have a computer in the house? Or what if it was a laptop and you took it with you to work? What if you as a parent only let your child have a restricted access at the library so that they don't... This is true, man. There was a time when I was really poor as a grad student and I didn't have a computer of my own. And I would go and I would do computer work at the library. And I remember having to stand in line because you could book X amount of time. I remember standing in line while a 14-year-old boy watched porn so that I could write my assignment. But that was considered protected free speech.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, like, maybe don't let your kid go to the library without, like, some accountability. Maybe one of the things that we're not talking about is large-scale imbibing of social media, which does that brain on stick, ratcheting up with none of the real-time space navigation, is a wildly unhealthy, habituated form of primary learning.
I remember there was a stand-up comedian, actually I can't remember who the stand-up comedian was at this moment, but he just was doing this bit about how we just don't have social norms that can build empathy the same way, because it used to be if you said something mean to somebody at recess, you said it to their face and you saw them go down, you saw them kind of recoil, and then you saw something in you that was like, ooh, I don't like that I made them feel that way, and then there was this kind of moment where you could have this empathetic moment where you saw them and you didn't like it. Now with just through screens,
and then I get a whole bunch of likes,
and you get likes for it, you never see the way that they actually feel, and it dumbs down our empathy to where we don't actually have those tools.
Yeah, like we don't know. It's very interesting, but across all sort of benchmarks, we're literally losing the shared social fabric. And it's like, it's across all domains. People don't know how to talk face to face. People don't know how to participate in community face to face. When we look at dating, men and women don't know how to build relationship face to face. It's very bizarre, the outcroppings. And so while gun violence is a thing, I think in general, what I would say is the ratcheting up comes as a result of the longevity and quantity that you spend in those virtual social worlds. You know, when I was a kid, like, we got to play Super Mario Brothers for like 2 extra hours past bedtime on a Friday night. And that was it. But you've got kids that are estimated to be spending 8 hours plus outside of the school day on social media, on other like virtual, on gaming platforms, on all these other things. And when your life is lived in that moderated, not person-to-person way, I think you don't develop appropriately. And so this is when I think you find people like resorting to real violence over virtual grievance, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it's the only factor, and I think it's a complex multifactorial analysis. I'm not trying to be trite. What I want to say is, in general, the less any human person thinks of their world as existing in there and thinks of it as existing in the here and now present tense with real other embodied people, the healthier and the less catastrophic people are going to be because of that co-regulation. If I'm bombastic, I see your body recoil, I see your physiology. Like, when we void all that, we become tone deaf.
I'm really glad that you're on the podcast today, because talking about being able to play Super Mario Brothers for just a couple hours, it's like the only other time that I'm not the only like boomer-esque person on the podcast talking about simpler times. You know, Abby she's Gen Z, so I feel like old man all the time.
No, all the time. But I am like, and I mean, the first gaming system we had was like an Atari. I paid like
Asteroids.
Yeah, I played with like the old school joystick with like the one button.
Kids these days don't even know. Don't even know.
I'm not saying there aren't great things that come as a result. I am not a Luddite. I'm not saying technology is bad. What I am saying is, make your kids go out and play in the backyard. Like, proportion that, right?
Yeah, and actually, lead that instead of just letting it go the way that culture is just saying, like,
put your phone to bed too. Yeah. You know, and I do that. Like, in my own home, it's like we're not on our phones during meal times. We're not on our electronics on the Sabbath. Like, there are these things that we do. Do we do them perfectly? No. But like, having a sense of the context of the virtual and how small that is in comparison to the people that you literally stand next to in the line at Starbucks and getting prescriptions at Meijer. This idea that like this is your community. the brain on a stick that you imagine yourself to be in that virtual community is not who you are. The guy that doesn't take the garbage out in the here and now, that's who you are. The mom that doesn't put the phone down and tuck the kids in, that's who you are. And I think often we can buy the hype. We can buy our own hype, and we can like read our own Facebook feed and believe it a little too much, or Instagram or whatever. Like, I know Facebook's old now, but
It's me and you, we're on Facebook. There it is.
Right, like I'm a geezer.
They're on the Tickety Talks and all those other things.
Okay, but what I'm saying is you can believe the video presentation of self on those other, and this I think is the core problem. And in that sense, the hype resulting in the violence, I think, is the manifestation of this other deeper rooted issue. And so, like, even in my clinical practice, like, I have parents be like, we fight about video. Like, I fight about my kids, getting them off electronics, getting them to do, I mean, this is something I see a lot. And I'm like, you need to go to war with your kids. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, what am I going to do? They're going to hate me. And I'm like, yes, let them hate you. Like, I'm serious. Yeah. Your kids should be like, Mom, you don't understand. All my other friends are. You should be like, yeah, but I'm not their mom. Yeah. So you come home, you get 30 minutes. When that 30 minutes is done, read a book, take a shower, wash the dishes, help your brother with homework, go for a walk, pet the dog. What you don't get to do is ask for another 30 minutes. I mean, you can, but we all know what the answer is going to be.
So I want to ask, just on the other side of the revenge scenario, is forgiveness. And like, instead of the attack back, the punch back, what are the pitfalls to us in our cultural moment moving towards what real forgiveness is, and maybe what like soft forgiveness is, or what it looks like on a Hobby Lobby sign?
Yeah. And
what are those first steps that we can take to like be grown-ups that like choose that forgiveness is actually the thing that ends the cycle instead of perpetuating the cycle?
Okay, so that's actually a really complex question.
Because forgiveness can be such a forgive and forget and all those like
things.
And
so first of all, like, I think one of the things we need to do is we need to reconnect with the idea of what forgiveness even is.
Yes.
Like, forgiveness isn't, I'm never going to need to talk about it again. Forgiveness isn't, I'm not going to need to deepen my healing later on
and
about it.
It's not even restoration with the person who hurt you. Yeah.
Yeah, like, forgiveness is, and like, scripturally, forgiveness is a very particular thing. Forgiveness is, I hold you harmless, and I cede all rights to recompense. I cede all rights to leveling. I'm giving that over to God to handle. And so I am no longer putting myself in the place of seeking recompense or any form of soothing of self in the face of that injustice.
It's forfeiting the right to get even.
Yeah, in any way, shape, or form. Or not even just get even like I no longer want there to be any form of compensatory measure.
Yeah, any form of debt.
Yeah, there's no debt. We're removing the debt load. Mm-hmm. Not just that I want you to pay extra in damages. I'm removing like the I'm removing the original offense, and I'm saying, You and God, you can deal with that. So first of all, I think Christian circles often have a poorly conceptualized idea of like, can I still be grieving? Can I still be hurt? Can I still be sad? Can I still have things to process and forgive? Yeah, you absolutely can. Absolutely can. So you can be in process in other facets of the offense and still stand in a posture to forgive, right? Second thing is, culturally, we've stopped acknowledging that the person that did the offense needs to come ask for your forgiveness. So it actually is a mutual process. I can't forgive you if you don't say, would you forgive me?
If you just don't claim any fault, and if you don't come and say, I need to own this piece of it, there can be no...
I can stand ready. I can have a posture towards you. But like, forgiveness is actually a mutual thing. Yeah. And it's actually, you're right, not restoration of relationship. I can be like, I hold you harmless, but I don't want to resume the relationship we had anymore, either for safety or for logistics, or like there are a variety of reasons people could make that choice. But I think acknowledging what forgiveness is and isn't and having clear working definitions is part of it. I think the other part is, in order to genuinely forgive, like, people will come into my office and they'll be like, so-and-so did this, but like, I forgave him a long time ago. And I'm like, okay, so what did that look like? And it's like, like, I just let it go and I don't think about it. And I'm like, actually, that's taking that offense, putting in one of those space bags, vacuuming the air out of it, and putting it in a storage unit. That's not forgiveness at all. That's actually just like neatly preserving the offense over here. That's not healing at all. What actually is involved in forgiveness is a full accounting and reckoning of what the offense was.
It's got to start there.
It's got to start with, like, this thing happened, and this thing impacted me and mine, and here's the blast radius of that offense. You can't forgive what you forget. And, like, let's just acknowledge.
Yeah.
We don't really forget.
Yeah.
No.
We pretend we forget. The body keeps the score. We hold it in our physiology. We hold it in our minds. We hold it in our hearts. So the reality is, we don't want to forgive, because the first step of forgiveness is the genuine squaring off with the offense itself. And we're going back to, why does revenge feel so good, right? It's like, if I jump and strike back immediately, I can be like, you didn't even hurt me that bad. See, I got you bigger than you got me. Mm-hmm. I don't even have to account for my wounds or my injuries, right? It's actually much harder to forgive, because you have to start by being like, let's talk about the ways I hurt. Let's talk about the ways you did. You stepped over me. You removed my power. You denied my human dignity. Okay, we start there. And then I square that in the face, and then I say, and then where do we forgive, right? As the Christian person, it's like, I'm going to look that offense square in the face, and I'm going to be honest about all of the ways I have sinned in thought, word, and deed, and all of the ways I stand in profound need of being forgiven for the things that I have done. Shameful, terrible, unloving, hurtful, vindictive, petty.
You're not a hero without fault.
Yeah, it's not like, in my magnanimity, I forgive you.
Yeah, and that's just another way of pride.
It is. It's pride. Like, and that's why revenge. Like, we get to be on that moral superiority to the max.
Feels so good. It's a heck of a drug.
Yeah, it does. No, it does, and it is. It's a drug. As opposed to being like, you know what? I have done things in thought, word, and deed that I cannot take back, that are unspeakably unpleasant. And because I want those covered, I'm going to choose to let that be between you and God. In the same way, when I mess up, I want that to be between me and God, right? Like, I want the credit, right? I want Christ to take that. I don't want to take ownership of that. I stand so desperately in need of you saying, you know what, I'm going to let that be between you and God. I don't need to get back at you. You can talk to God about that. Now, that doesn't mean, right? Like, there are things that you can do that mean, like, for the rest of your life, there are boundaries in place. That isn't, by the way, getting back at. That's not retaliation. Sometimes there are breaches past which we cannot restore to the original relationship. But I can let go.
Forgive.
I can let go, and I can say, that's above my pay grade.
Yeah. I was just with some friends last night studying the Jesus teaching the parable of the unmerciful servant, which is just this magnum opus on forgiveness. And there is a verse in the story. There's a guy who racks up a ridiculous debt, and he begs his master to forgive him of the debt so his family could go free and not be in prison after selling all their things. And then the master, the king, the God figure in the story, actually in verse 27 of chapter 18 of Matthew says he took pity on him, canceled the debt, and then let him go. And inside of those steps of the master, the God figure in the story, you really do see those steps of forgiveness you just talked about. Like, took pity on him meant that, like, there was this reckoning of, this is what this person had done, and I'm going to, like, think through what they had experienced and actually have compassion. That phrase, took pity, is to actually consider your own life, empathy, and understanding your own brokenness. Took pity on him is all inside of that. And then the canceling of the debt was to say that I'm going to forfeit my right to get back what happened. It's like actually this choice that is so challenging and so counterintuitive to our human nature, but it's like, I'm going to cancel that debt. And then the master let him go, was to say that this is not on me. This is not my pay grade for me to get back and to like make this justice happen. I'm going to let it go. And in your words, to say like, bring that between you and God, but I'm out of this now. And it's just such a powerful, robust understanding of what forgiveness is compared to the forgive and forget kind of let go and let God kind of thing that we get tossed at so often.
I just want to pick at one little thread here, because this even Christian clients come in my room, and this is one of the things that, again, that kind of Hobby Lobby Christianity we've been kind of, and by the way, I love me some Hobby Lobby. I mean, I go in there and I get all kinds of crafty supplies. But
we'll still get sponsored by Hobby Lobby because of Creations.
I just say, no, I just want to say, like, I think their signs are glib and trite, and I would never buy those, but like, I like their paint sets. They do. And I like that they're closed on the Sabbath. Like let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. But like that Hobby Lobby variant of Christianity has this idea that like with Jesus, I kind of become a pretty good person. And there's a pride in that I see a lot, because I'll see Christian clients come in and be like, you know, like I'm a nice guy. I'm a good person. And I find myself being like, where do you go to church? Like, I don't want to castigate your pastor, but like, and I find myself having to have this conversation because while I don't want to impugn their spiritual experience, I feel like their theology is really off here. And I find myself being like, that's so interesting, because I got to tell you, I am so clear that I am not a good person. And they're taken aback, like, what do you mean? And I'm like, no, I live inside my head and my heart, and I'm not a great person. I'm not even a good person. I think this idea that like I'm now cleaned up is part of that toxic positivity. It's part of that glibness we see, and I think it permeates Christianity. I think we really struggle to be like, no, I am just as dank a sinner as I was the day I found Christ. It's not like Christ is in the like, right? He's in the sanctification business, but he's not about like helping sinners live their best life now, right? It's not about me being a good person. It's about me taking a journey of sanctification that leads to something holy. But this idea that like somehow I'm holy now, I'm not. And I tell my clients that, and I can start there. I'm like, I'm not a good person. I struggle with a lot of different frailties. And I think if you're honest, when you say I'm a good person, what we mean is like, I'm not an axe murderer, as if somehow that gives us a leg up. But we're back to that trying to fig leaf. And again, that puts us in that place of revenge. If we think we're pretty good, that gives us standing.
Higher ground.
Yeah, it's only when I'm like, I am always and only as a Christian a beggar, telling other people where to go beg for bread. That's it. Like, I'm never above that. If you keep it there, then there is this mutual posture of like, you can hurt me and I can say to you, I can forgive that because I have hurt others. Thought, word, and deed. By what I've done, what I've left undone, I have done things that I can't possibly ever take back. And I bet that's how you might feel about this. And rather than me stay in the middle of that, I'm going to step out and be like, I'm not that great of a person. I never was. But forgiveness, like I need that. I need Christ to forgive me. I need to be forgiven for my sins. So I'm going to embrace the fact that you probably need the exact same thing I need. And then now we're on equal footing and there's a shared humanity. I think the shared humanity, when you stand on polar opposites, you know, and again, the internet has given rise to vilification upon vilification. It's Republicans and Democrats. It's, you know, this and that, like, pick your binary of choice. And we're always othering the other guy, taking that slightly moral superiority edge. I mean, being humble, we have faults, but like really we're kind of cleaned up just enough to have that moral high ground. And it's like, no, we're all beggars. And if we start there, revenge looks less attractive. But honestly, that's not cheap and that's not easy. And that involves getting out of that virtual world and having that person-to-person real relational encounter over and over with your kids. And that requires humility and transparency in your parenting. So like when we talk about gun violence, it's 100 million factors. I don't think there's one easy fix. But here's what I can say. The more you spend real time and space with real other human people, the better your life is going to get. This is just a fundamental bias of every social issue research ever done. The more you can be in a room, person to person, soul to soul, the better, more mentally healthy and stable your world and life will be.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks
this has
for
been
having
awesome.
me.
So much fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, that's it for this episode of Atypical Talk. If you have any topics, questions, or anything like that, you can email those to atypicaltalkpod@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at atypicaltalkpod. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to get updates when new episodes go live. We hope that these conversations today have helped you think wider, love deeper, and partner with God to bring the up there down here in your everyday life. Thanks for listening.